Welcome to Human Factors Cast, your weekly podcast for human factors, psychology, and design.
Hi, everyone. I'm your guest host today, Elyse Hallett, and I am joined today with Rebecca Butler from MedStar Health. Hi, Rebecca.
Hello.
How's it going?
Good. It's nice to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We're really happy to have you on the show. So for folks listening in, you might, recognize my voice from past conferences that I've covered for the Human Factors Cast. I'm here instead of Nick today, actually interviewing Rebecca, who I saw one of your panels at the past Human Factors Healthcare Symposium that took place virtually this year. So that was a really awesome experience. But through that, just, got to learn a little bit about the stuff that Rebecca does, and, thought that having you on the show and talking a little bit about what you do as a human factors specialist in the healthcare field would be, an awesome opportunity for, our listeners to, learn a little bit more about that.
Great. Yeah. Happy to talk about it. It's fun work. So it's always fun to share with others.
Well, in exciting times, right?
Yeah. Especially this past year has been unlike any others.
Absolutely. But before we get into all that, I wanted to start a little bit before your current position at MedStar Health. So how did you get involved in human factors initially, and what was your background that ultimately led you to the position that you're at now at MedStar Health?
Yeah, so in undergrad, I studied industrial and systems engineering at Virginia Tech, go Hokies. And one of our classes was the Intro to Human Factors class. That was hands down my favorite class of all 4 years. And so when I first graduated, I worked in a different field for a few years and just kept coming back to the fact that that's the class that really made me happy, that I really liked doing that work. And so just looking for a new career path, Google led me to MedStar's National Center for Human Factors in Healthcare, and I was able to start there as a usability assistant on their usability services team. So I really got to do hands-on human factors work for the first time with working with manufacturers of medical devices, doing the pre-market formative and validation usability testing. And in my role there, I was able to, because we're part of a hospital system at the Human Factors Center, I was able to work on patient safety event reviews, particularly safety events that involved medical devices. So because of the specializing in usability of the devices, we'd get involved in those event reviews. And I found that I really liked patient safety. I really liked working on the hospital side, internal to our system, and while I was at the Human Factors Center, I was able to get my master's in human factors, and then a little over a year ago, a full-time position on the quality and safety team at MedStar Health opened up, and they have a real desire to really integrate human factors throughout our healthcare system, and so I was given the opportunity to join the team, and that's where I am now.
That's awesome. And what a cool perspective that your background in, industrial engineering must bring to, the field as well.
Yeah, it's interesting to have my undergrad's in engineering and my master's is in psychology. So it's interesting to have the two sides of human factors collide. So I love it.
That's awesome. Well, it's definitely a multidisciplinary field for sure.
Yeah.
And so then so you mentioned that you work at MedStar Health now under the quality and safety team. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So can you explain a little bit about what this team is, the kind of stuff that you do, and really how you as a human factors specialist fit into all of it?
Yeah. So the quality and safety team oversees quality and safety for the whole MedStar Health system, but our each hospital and our ambulatory service lines, they have their own local quality and safety teams. And so we see our role at the system level as really a service organization to the hospitals, to those teams. And we help coordinate improvement efforts that cross multiple hospitals, across the whole system. And so kind of coordinating the work that all those smaller teams are doing. And then I sit in particular on the safety team. And I help do systems-based event reviews. So if there's patient safety event, going out and looking at it from a systems perspective, teaching people how to do that, teaching people at the local level how to do that, and then bringing a human factors lens to the solution development piece of it. So helping create solutions that are more than just retraining people or creating new policies, but that actually address those gaps that we have in the system to prevent the safety events from happening in the future. And then I'm in a growing role for working more with our proactive approach to patient safety as well. So identifying our hazards and risks before they reach patients and before they cause any harm, identifying those near misses and coming up with solutions and ways we can proactively fix those and remove them from the system. So
that sounds so interesting, and it sounds like you're really integrated into, you know, this larger system as a whole, as opposed to being, you know, some afterthought check in the box later on.
Yeah, it's a very, I realize I'm very fortunate to be in MedStar Health the way that we've championed by Terry Fairbanks, certainly, like just the integration of human factors throughout the system. It's nice to be in a place where it's not, I don't usually, it's not like people have never heard of human factors. We certainly some teaching when we come into a new place with a new team that maybe hasn't worked with us before, but definitely a unique and great place to be as a human factors specialist.
It sounds really awesome. And you've mentioned a couple times this concept of safety events. Could you elaborate for the audience of, you know, what this means and, you know, maybe an example?
Sure. So, I mean, a safety event would, when I say that, what I mean is anytime there's what we look into is anytime there's an unanticipated outcome. So something happens to a patient that we didn't anticipate. So outside of the normal complications of just whatever their condition might be. And we review those to figure out were there deviations from what we would say the expected standard of care is? Were there deviations in whatever we were doing to treat that patient? Was there something that we could have prevented? Was the harm that occurred to that patient something we could have prevented? And so by reviewing the event, we're looking at the environment, the electronic health record. Were there usability issues that caused somebody to prescribe the wrong medication to a patient, or deliver a medication the wrong route, or misdiagnoses? All those types of things. Were there things in the system that made it hard to do the right thing? And how can we fix the system to make it easy to do the right thing, to prevent those patient safety events where there's unanticipated harm?
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense, and really taking that systems perspective and applying it to the analysis of these particular events.
Mm-hmm.
So before COVID-19 broke out as a global pandemic, and I'm sure changed a lot of what you do in, you know, the healthcare field specifically, what did your day-to-day look like as a human factors specialist? What types of projects or work were you involved in?
So I had just recently joined the quality and safety team full time, only about a month or two before the pandemic hit.
Oh, wow.
So I was still sort of getting into what my normal day-to-day would look like, and a little bit of transition out of my role on the usability services team. So I was wrapping up some of those final validation studies, so those final usability studies before a product gets approved by the FDA. For our manufacturers, and then moving into my role with the safety team, where my day-to-day was reviewing event reviews. So obviously, with a large system, we have 10 hospitals, we have 200 ambulatory sites. Like I said, we have those local teams that are doing event reviews, and a lot of my day-to-day would be assisting with those event reviews where necessary, particularly ones that might require a human factors lens, and then also reviewing event reviews and actions that other teams have created and come up with, and then giving input and making sure that if there's an action or a problem that's been identified at one hospital, figuring out, is that something that we need to make sure all the other hospitals also know about, and figuring out the best way to communicate that across the larger system. So that's what my day-to-day was pre-pandemic.
And so you mentioned, providing that human factors lens. What were some of the other types of specialties that you were working with?
Other specialties, like on the event reviews.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have a clinical background, and so I always want to make sure that there are those clinical perspectives in any of these event reviews, because I can't speak to I can't really speak to standard of care or how things should or shouldn't be done or how they're typically done from that clinical perspective. So there's there's always working with the nursing or whatever specialty it was that event review took place in, working with the information services people that set up the EHR, figuring out what we can and can't do within our electronic health record, the product we use. So definitely interdisciplinary there, working with all those teams to review an event, because one perspective can never really paint the whole picture.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And then, COVID-19 breaks out, you're there for, you said, about a month. How did that change your position, the kind of things you were working on, what you were doing?
Yeah. So pretty much our whole team shifted to my whole team, I say quality and safety, shifted to be really all hands on deck in the pandemic response. Our leaders sort of oversaw the systems response to COVID-19, and so our day-to-day really shifted to helping people figure out, like, okay, what's confusing, what can we help with. At the beginning, it was very much not a specific ask, but we could see that there was confusion going on, and so us more asking, like, where can we help? The infection prevention is managed at the system level within the quality and safety team as well at MedStar, and so seeing our colleagues just get inundated with questions and confusion that was going on across the system, people just not knowing what PPE, who am I supposed to test, how do we manage patients coming in, how do we screen them, and so we could see that they were getting all of these questions, and there's just a lot of work for those that team to take on, and so we just stepped in and heard what concerns they were hearing, what challenges people were having, and tried to figure out, was there any way that we could help from the human factors perspective. And that's how we got to the graphics creation that I talked about in my talk at HFES. That's where the majority of my time was spent, was in developing the graphics and documents and workflows for frontline to use to understand the new policies and procedures.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue into diving into some of those things. So you mentioned, the team just getting inundated with all these questions, and one of the challenges that your talk focused on specifically was this element of communication. Specifically, how do you provide this information to people in a way that is both usable and still supports the rapidly changing information, to ensure that they're trusting that information. They know that it's the latest and greatest, but we're not overwhelming people. And so you mentioned a couple, example products of, how you got involved. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what some of those were, and some of the strategies you took to help ensure that people were getting that rapidly changing information, but in a more usable way?
Yeah, sure. So the PPE graphic is one that I shared in the talk, and that at the beginning, that was one of the biggest things that was a change and new, and we had PPE that you just had to wear in different situations needed different PPE. And I had shared on the talk that this was all written down and in a large text document that had all the information people needed, but we knew that they needed a way to actually be able to look at this and digest it. And so the graphics seemed like a way that could communicate it could communicate multiple situations. So there's rows for all the different situations that people might have, and then including not just text but pictures. And we were able to sort of roll that out fairly quickly in the first week or two, and then certainly iterate on it as things changed and as we got feedback of things that were still confusing. So that's one of those examples of how where we saw that there was a need, and we knew that the visual portrayal of that information and organizing it in a chart format was just easier to digest for people.
And I loved one of the examples that you had in there of you didn't just include, a basic picture of, say, a hospital gown, but really like using the different types of hospital gowns across the hospitals, knowing that you did support a network of hospitals, not just one, and making sure that you were representing things very much in line with how people were used to seeing that in the real world.
Yeah, and that was one of those things that we honestly didn't think about at first. It was through user feedback that we were able to make that change, because we were just thinking the gown. We just need a picture of a gown, and there was a lot of fear around the wanting to make sure you're wearing the right PPE at the beginning. And so when we had a picture of a blue gown and people were receiving yellow gowns when they got to work, there were just a lot of questions about, is this the right thing? Is this what I'm supposed to be wearing? Is this safe? Am I actually going to be protected? And so in order to build that trust in the documents that we were sharing, we had to make sure that we were including what people were actually seeing and actually receiving, so that they knew that, yes, these are equivalent. Yes, they're the same. They're both equally safe and both equally correct for you to be able to wear in these situations.
And I love that you touch on incorporating the user feedback. How did you get user feedback? Because your setting is a little different than someone like my background in consulting, where I'm setting up the whole usability test and bringing in people. What's that look like for you?
So I will say, particularly with my background coming from the usability services team, where that is what we did, where we had the full, like a week-long user testing, and we're setting up scenarios and asking people pointed questions and being able to really iterate. It wasn't like that for the pandemic, for sure. And so we didn't get to do that. We didn't get to do direct user feedback and change those things before we rolled things out. And so one of the teams that we really relied on and used a lot was our group of infection preventionists at the hospitals. So all of our 10 hospitals have an infection preventionist, and their leaders at the system level had a daily call. And so we knew that they were going to be on a call an hour every single day at the beginning of the pandemic. And so we went to that meeting a lot and would share our graphics, share changes we were making to things, new documents that we were putting together, and got feedback from them. And we were also able to hear what they were hearing. Because they were there, they were at the front line, they were with their staff in the hospital, and they were hearing points of confusion, and were able to bring those back to us. So not as direct user feedback as you may typically want or design a usability study to have, but a group that was certainly invaluable to providing us that iterative feedback, and a great resource that the documents would not have been the way they were without the feedback from that group.
That's awesome. Yeah, I kind of equate to, your work is like human factors in the wild. You're right in the thick of it. And, we go to school and learn the proper methods, and then we go out into the wild and, have to make accommodations. But it sounds like the accommodations that you made were, right exactly where you needed to be, given all the like rapidly changing information, and just, getting people something that's usable, that's incorporating some of those challenges.
Yeah, and I think, if you're designing something and doing usability testing before you actually roll it out for the first time, you're ideally finding those points of confusion before anybody is trying to use it in the wild. But when during the past year, things changing so quickly, it was more like, okay, we think this is good enough. It's accurate. That was really the most important thing, was to make sure that the information we were sending out was accurate. And then if it still had some usability issues, we knew we could get to that later, but we'd roll it out. People would try to use it in the real world. Then we'd hear feedback, then we'd change and send out a new iteration, and they'd do it again. And it was cyclical like that, but we had to actually roll it out. So people were using it in real life, and that's how we would get our feedback, which, in an ideal world, you would figure those things out before you send people to use it in the real world. But
right, but the real world can be messy, and yeah. I love how you broke down that, the different levels. Like, what are you going to prioritize for this iteration? Like, okay, we'll get to some of the usability things later. Is it accurate first? And I think that's a really good perspective to take when you're trying to figure out how to get this information to people quickly, but also in a useful manner as well. That's great. One of the critical lessons learned that you and your co-presenter had shared was the importance of interdisciplinary collaboration. And you've kind of been touching on this a little bit through our discussion today, but can you elaborate on what that means and ultimately how you achieved it through your work supporting the pandemic?
Sure. So by interdisciplinary collaboration, what I mean is that what I've said is that we couldn't have created those documents on our own. Like, I don't have a background in infection prevention. I don't have that clinical specialty, and that was obviously imperative to the documents that we were creating. So as far as document creation, we had to incorporate all of the people that actually had that subject matter expertise. And then as far as rolling the information out to everybody, that really required close collaboration with the communications team, which is not a place where human factors has really had to overlap. We haven't seen a huge need for that in the past. So that was a new partnership that we were able to build there. But early on, with the document creation, it wasn't always clear who owned what documents, and local teams were creating resources for their teams. Then different specialty lines were creating new processes for their groups, and then we really needed to have a cohesive voice across our system. And so what we realized we needed to do was establish a point of contact. Who owns the nursing documents? Who owns the PPE documents? Who owns the new clinical protocols? And once we had those clearly defined, it became a lot easier. So my colleague Lucy Stein, she really is the one that she took on creating the website that we had and that we shared a little bit about in our talk, and maintaining it on a day-to-day basis as things changed. And at the beginning, she could get 5 or 6 different people emailing her saying, hey, here's new documents to go onto the website. And after we changed and pivoted to having this person can say these are good, this person says these are good, it was much more streamlined. The document quality went up. They were more consistent that way, having more streamlined review processes, creation processes, and then having one person being able to post them, and then know that we're working with communications to be able to send them out at the same time that they're posted on the website, so that people are able to access the correct information in the multiple places that we have it posted.
How many human factors people are on your team?
So, I'm definitely not an N of 1 at MedStar, so that's really helpful. On the work that we shared in our talk, I would say that there are Lucy and I are the trained in human factors, but I would say our whole team really has human factors expertise just based on all of the work that we've done. And then the Human Factors Center that MedStar has has 50 or 60 employees that are all specializing in human factors. And Lucy actually plays an interesting role where she gets 50% with the Human Factors Center and 50% of her time with quality and safety. So we have that nice bridge from all of the great expertise we have at our Human Factors Center that gets to cross over into the quality and safety team.
Gotcha. Yeah, the reason why I ask is because it sounds like you were involved in so many, kind of facets of this communication strategy. And I can imagine, just, human factors alone cannot solve this, but really relying on that expertise and the input from so many different perspectives sounds like it was really one of the big things that, made this such a great success story.
Yeah, I would agree. Just the collaboration and people knowing each other's expertise, I think is knowing and then deferring to each other's expertise is really beneficial and imperative in making this work successful, I think, because knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know is really important, so you can go to somebody who is specializes in that area, and you can make sure that you have their input in whatever it is you're working on.
Absolutely. So now that COVID-19 is starting, I wouldn't say it's over. We're not, quite out of it yet, but maybe more manageable. Where would you say your focus is now?
So me personally, I've been able to shift most of my work back to that pre-pandemic focus. So really being able to get more involved in patient safety event reviews, working on our proactive approach, proactive solutions to safety hazards that we have. I consult occasionally on new graphics that we create, but we really don't have that pressing need for constantly creating new material. And what we've been able to do is get those initial graphics that we created to a point where the subject matter expert is able to update those as needed. So the PPE graphics our infection preventionists can tweak on their own without they don't have to come to us every time, because it's at a point where they're able to manage those now. But for our team as a whole, I'd say quality and safety, my co-presenter Ann Catherine is just really leading this, making sure that we incorporate the lasting impacts of what we've learned and what we've started from COVID into our routine work moving forward. So things like there's a new quality metric that includes COVID numbers, and we built this. I was not in this, so I won't say we, but my team built up a contact tracing program, and that's really now an integrated part of our infection prevention program. And then the Human Factors team, so Lucy and the Human Factors Center, they have been really heavily involved in the vaccine rollout. So some of the communications pieces that she worked on in the beginning of the pandemic has been able to take over to that vaccine rollout piece. And they've developed communication tools for frontline associates to be able to communicate information to patients, coming up with creative ways to reach more of the vulnerable populations where emails and texts about the vaccine just don't reach those patients. And then they've also been consulted on workflow and signage and logistics for a large-scale vaccine site that MedStar is running in partnership with some other healthcare systems in the area. So the work that we did at the beginning, I think, has set us up to see the value of including human factors expertise in all this work. And that's really, all the stuff that the Human Factors Center is doing with the vaccine rollout really shows that people value that at MedStar, which is great for us. We want to be able to bring our human factors knowledge to all these all the areas that we can help in. But yeah, so for the most part, I'm back to my pre-pandemic role, but the pandemic, like you said, is not over. So there's other initiatives still ongoing.
That's fantastic. And I love what you said. The work that you did early on really sets the precedence moving forward, and really getting human factors, continually showing our value in integrating in the process has been such a great, I think, success story because of all the implications that the pandemic has for, interesting human factors problems, everything we study about. So, Rebecca, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today and chatting with everyone. Where can our listeners find you if they, want more information?
You can definitely find me on LinkedIn. You can look at my name. I know I'll share the link with you all so you can go there directly, but happy to connect with anybody who's interested.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We always end the podcast with the classic, it depends, because human factors, it depends. So if you wouldn't mind me joining as we conclude, I'll count off to 3 and then we can say it depends. So 1, 2, 3, it depends.
It depends.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Human Factors Cast brings you the best in human factors news, interviews, conference coverage, and overall fun conversations into each and every episode we produce. But we can't do it without you. The Human Factors Cast network is 100% listener supported. All the funds that go into running the show come from our listeners. Our patrons are our priority, and we want to ensure we're giving back to you for supporting us. Pledges start at just $1 per month and include rewards like access to our weekly Q&As with the hosts, personalized professional reviews, and Human Factors Minute, a Patreon-only weekly podcast where the hosts break down unique, obscure, and interesting human factors topics in just 1 minute. Patreon rewards are always evolving, so stop by patreon.com/humanfactorscast to see what support level may be right for you. Thank you, and remember, it depends.